What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we're doing trade targets, except unlike in yesterday's video, we're going to do the sell high candidates. We're going to go through 5 of them, and today we have 3 running backs and 2 wide receivers that if they're on your team, you should definitely look to get rid of them and upgrade at the position. But before we do get into the video though, make sure you're following both Nick and I on Twitter. I know you guys have questions. I see them in the YouTube comment section all the time. Unfortunately, there's simply too many questions for us to answer, so the best way to contact us is through Twitter. We are both most active on there, and we answer as many questions as we can. So if you do have a start-sit question, maybe a trade question that's specific, leave it on Twitter, and when we have our free time, we're going to go through those questions and answer as many as we can. And hey, if you got in Howard, and it's safe to say that Howard is on a complete heater, at least a heater compared to what he was doing at the beginning of the season. How much so? Well, he scored 4 times in the last 3 games, and while most people think that's a really good sign, me personally, I see that as an issue. Touchdowns are where all of his production is coming from. In fact, 56% of his total fantasy points over the past 3 weeks have came from touchdowns. So what does that mean? He has almost no floor. His rushing average per game alone is just 55 yards. That's right, 55 yards. And Howard has just 1 reception in the past 5 games. So his floor is about 3 fantasy points. So I think that's something we all can agree on. He just had his best game of the entire season, which came in at a whopping 16.7 fantasy points. So congratulations, your peak in fantasy points is what 10 other running backs in the league are averaging. And in order to accomplish that feat, that 16.7, he scored 2 touchdowns. How often are you going to expect to get that type of production? And hey, 16.7 points in a PPR league isn't all that much. And while for most running backs, we can expect touchdowns because usage in the red zone is relatively consistent, for Jordan Howard, it hasn't been consistent all season. I do believe that they will continue to use him in the red zone because he's had so much success recently, but this offense prides itself on being creative and innovative, so they aren't going to simply just hand the ball off to Jordan Howard every time they reach inside the 5-yard line. Not to mention, positive game scripts for Howard aren't always going to be there. There are some good rushing matchups ahead on his schedule, which is going to make potential trade partners more interested. But remember, this is the same running back who put up 4.9 points against Miami. The same Miami that allowed Lamar Miller to rush 18 for 133 and a touchdown on them. So for me, he's had 3 good games in a row. I'm looking to move him as soon as possible. Now moving on, we have Calvin Ridley of the Atlanta Falcons, and after scoring 6 touchdowns in his first 4 games, Ridley finally came crashing back down to earth. And you know what? That was to be expected. Not every first-round rookie receiver is going to have an Odell Beckham type season, especially with Julio Jones on the team. Rookie receivers are often super inconsistent, and Ridley is not an exception. Everyone had to know that the only real constant when predicting fantasy points for receivers is volume, and for Ridley, the volume just simply hasn't been there consistently. He's currently ranked 47th in targets, but 19th in fantasy points, so get that through your head. Yes, if you look at how they use him, he does have an increased chance of reaching the end zone over most receivers in this range just due to the offense that he's on, but what's working against him is how many weapons this team actually has. Predicting which player week in and week out is going to have the good game on this team is extremely hard. In some weeks, it's going to be Ridley, others it's going to be Sanu, and even Hooper at times. All of these players have had their turn in this offense having these big games. Typically, the players I like to have on my team are the ones I can easily determine if they're a solid start or a solid sit, where they have a low chance of having a dud in a positive matchup, and in those negative matchups, you can sit them with confidence. For Ridley, it really hasn't been easy to predict, at least not this far. His 2 worst games came against Pittsburgh and Tampa Bay, which heading into those matchups, as an owner, you were super excited to start him. So for me, now that he's broken out of this 3-game slump, it's time to trade him. He still has that name value, and his bad games haven't been horrible. He's still a top 20 wide receiver on the season with great matchups in 3 out of the next 5 games. But if you're able to get something that's more consistent in return for him, I think you're going to help your team avoid a dud in the playoffs. And hey, that's what it's all about at this point in the season. The next player on this list is a guy that I think you just have to get rid of, and that's Alex Collins of the Baltimore Ravens, and it's very similar to the Jordan Howard situation. He's a touchdown or bust guy, but the only difference is that he's getting even less touches than Howard and is on an even worse offense with less scoring opportunities. He also leads the league in fumbles at the running back position and has been previously benched for that problem. And with adding Ty Montgomery and Buck Allen still being there, there is a chance that he fumbles away his starting position, and if you really want to consider it a starting position. I mean, I think it's more of a running back by committee, but regardless, if he fumbles, he's going to get less touches, and it looks like as the season has been progressing, this defense is getting worse and worse. And one of the benefits of having a Baltimore Ravens running back was having that good defense to provide some positive game scripts for you. So the offense, it's not great. The defense, it's trending downward. And the only positive thing that I see for Alex Collins is that he does have some really good matchups coming up. If we're looking backwards, he has scored 4 touchdowns in the past 4 weeks, but if you're the type of player who needs a touchdown just to hit double-digit points and just barely over double-digit points, you're not a person I can ever feel comfortable starting, even in a great matchup. So pretty much Collins has been a massive disappointment this season, and he's coming off of a somewhat decent game. He does have a bye week this week, and he's currently ranked as the RB21, but even considering all those factors, I'm not going to be asking for much in return for him at all. To me, he's a bench player. I'm going to trade him like he's a bench player, because even though he's RB21 on the season, if you look at points per game, he's actually RB25 because of his bye weeks this week. So essentially, he's an extremely volatile flex player, and those aren't the type of guys that I want on my team at all, especially as I head into the playoffs. I would legitimately trade him for Dion Lewis, who unlike Collins is actually trending upward and has some good matchups as well ahead. Moving on, we have the final wide receiver, and he's on the thumbnail, and I know you guys were probably freaking out when you saw T.Y. Hilton as a sell high. No, he's not necessarily a sell high, but I'm not sure if by the trade deadline he's going to have a boom game, and once people start realizing how tough his schedule is and how banged up he still is, he may lose all the name value and all the trade value that he currently has today. If you dive into his numbers and you see what he's producing, you'll see that he's not getting the yardage that we're used to when it comes to T.Y. Hilton. He also hasn't received more than 6 targets since week 3, and through that same span, he's only contributed to 13% of Andrew Luck's total targets. Now that's alarming, and even though he's usually a deep threat type player and doesn't rely on sheer volume alone to produce, he has been used in more short and intermediate routes this season, which could be seen by his average in his yards per reception, which is the second lowest in his 7-year career. And that's not what you want to look for in a player who's been a wide receiver 1 and has also averaged over 1,100 yards per season heading into this year. I could overlook a lot of those factors, but for me, the worst part and the reason I think he should be shipped off immediately is because 5 of his final 7 matchups are against top 10 pass defenses when it comes to allowing fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, and that's including 4 that are in the top 5, and 2 of those top 5 teams are in the fantasy playoffs weeks 15 and 16, which are the ones that really matter and determine what type of money you're going to be receiving for your whole fantasy season. But jumping back, I understand he's not a sell high candidate. He's coming off of a 1 catch for 34 yards performance, which isn't great. Now he faces Jacksonville, which could also be a mess. Jacksonville as a team knows how to pressure the quarterback, which may not give Luck enough time to allow the plays to develop downfield. So a bad game is the most likely outcome for Hilton this week, but it's never a guarantee. Last time he faced Jacksonville last season with Jacoby Brissett, Hilton did have a solid performance, going 3 for 51 and a touchdown, so it's not impossible for him to overcome this matchup. But if you can start sending out offers with him right now as maybe a secondary piece in the trade, his name value alone is going to make people interested. And if they haven't looked at the upcoming schedule yet, they actually may be excited of the upside of Hilton and having him on their team, so send out some offers. The final player on this list is Tevin Coleman, and I know he doesn't quite belong in the same range of some of these other guys who I suspect are going to completely fall off a cliff, because yeah, he's going to be a somewhat consistent RB2, and it's not like he's not going to produce for your team on a week-by-week basis. In fact, he has a relatively safe floor. But the issue is, or at least heading into this week, is that we just haven't seen the upside. Coleman now exploded for a 32.6 point fantasy performance, which is nearly double his previous season high. And when I see big explosion games like this, it's always a good idea to start sending out offers, because the most likely scenario for Coleman's production is to return to the mean, and for Coleman, that's around 11 PPR fantasy points, which, believe it or not, is a back-end RB2, and while he did perform more efficiently than he has done all season, we never want to put too much weight on a single game, and we already have a 7-game sample leading into this game. And what has Coleman looked like so far? Well, he ranked 75th in elusiveness rating and 58th in his overall rushing grade per Pro Football Focus. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand he broke away some big plays, but that was never his issue. He's just been very underwhelming all season, and even though he's getting the touches, up to this point, he just hasn't been doing enough with them. So for me, I don't believe that he's going to take this step forward into the RB1 category week in and week out. Yes, he's consistent, but we haven't really seen the upside until now. So for me, if there ever was a time time to trade him, now would be the time. Capitalize on his recent success. There are plenty of RB needy teams right now that would love to get a piece of Coleman on their roster. Alright everybody, that's going to do it for this week's video. If you did enjoy it, please hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.